Okay, if all the make their way to the dais, the time is now 6:35. We're just waiting on, I think, our super. Okay. We don't have an audience. We want to respect the people's time who came on Valentine's Day, so we will go ahead and get our meeting started. The meeting is now called to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Ms. Banser,
Yes.
Ms. Wolfsey,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis, Mr. Oates, Mr. Fierro,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Here.
Ms. Morris, Dr. Hartsfeld, Ms. Robinson.
Here.
Thank you.
Hey, if there is no objection, the agenda is approved. And we will wait for our presentation for Dr. Bedell to present Board Monitoring 1.1 and 1.2. All right.
Madam Chair, would you remind Dr. Bedell that we like to start on time? I think that's a rule that he has established.
To get all of the, all of the particulars out of the way. I mean, the little minor details, and be ready when you walked in.
Yeah, I was being
Make sure.
distracted. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I understand it's Valentine's Day. Okay, I really appreciate this. I want to start off by just saying hello to everyone and wishing everybody a happy Valentine's Day. We are excited today to have an opportunity to present on our monitoring report. And for this board meeting, our board workshop, we're going to focus on board monitoring 1.1 and 1.2. We will have several members from our executive team who will present, Dr. Shepard, Mike Reynolds, and I want to say Trinity Davis, who's over here. But I also want to make sure that the board and the community is fully aware that this presentation today is very similar to the work that we've been doing throughout the school year and how we've been drilling deep into our data. We wanted to make sure that with anything that we present you it in its rawest form. We're not interested in interpreting and mixing data up just to make a presentation sound good. We want you all to understand that this is our truth. This is where we are, and these are the things that we have to work on. But we hope that at the conclusion of this board monitoring presentation, that you all will agree that what we've put in place and the focus that we have now to help address some of the areas that we want to continue to grow in as we look to meet the ends within Board Policy Series 1.0, that you all feel confident that this district is heading in the right direction with the leadership that's here. So at this time, I want to bring Dr. Shepard up.
All righty, good evening. So tonight, we will be reporting on Board Monitoring Report 1.1 and 1.2. 1.1 is about high achieving critical thinkers, and 1.2 is succeeding in a constantly changing world. And our first board monitoring will be report will be from Mike Reynolds.
Good evening. Before we delved into the APRs and some of the data, I wanted to provide a quick refresher about the components that make up our individual building APRs. As a school district as a whole, we're judged on 5 categories. That is also the same categories that our secondary schools or high schools will be judged on. And our elementary schools are only judged on 2 categories, on academic achievement and attendance. So what you see in front of you is the proportional weight of each of these standards as they apply to the individual building APRs. So it is important to note that elementary schools only have half the point allocations possible that high schools have. They do not have a measure for social studies, they do not have any career and college readiness measures, and they do not have the graduation rate measure. So that is important to take into consideration as we move forward in this presentation. That was pretty quick, sorry. This is just a visual representation of 3 years of longitudinal APR data by building. KCPS as a whole is represented with no colors on it. So it's easy to recognize the district's APR as a whole and as it relates to the individual building APRs. When we're looking at this slide, I would also like to refresh the audience, the board, and the cabinet that 70% and above is considered full accreditation for the state. 50 to 70% is considered provisional accreditation, and below 50% is considered non-accredited.
So summarizing here what you see on the previous page. In the percent accredited in 2016 was 36%. Percent accredited in 2017 is 56%. Now, what I will say is that we have the 5 high schools that are not being counted in 2017 based on our ELC, our algebra, and our English ELC had scoring problems or scoring challenges, and so those were taken out of our accountability. However, if you look back here, you see, though, that we also added 3 schools. We added Hale Cook this year, we added Central Middle, and we added Northeast Middle, and that is because the school must be open 3 years before it receives an APR. When we look at our data, we see that there are 8 schools that increased their APR from 2016 to 17, and we're very proud of those schools. Hartman Elementary, Whittier, Rogers, Truce, Holiday, Melcher, Longfellow, and Banneker. And then we also had 9 schools to drop their APR from 16 to 17. And those schools where you see an asterisk means that those schools only drop within, 1 to 5 points, 1 to 5 percentage points. The other schools did have more than a 5% drop. Looking at the schools that moved to a fully accredited status that we can celebrate would be Whittier Elementary, Rogers Elementary, and Melcher. And the other facts here, we had 5 schools that actually remained flat this year. We have 6 high schools that we just spoke about that did not receive an APR. 56% of our schools are above the threshold for accreditation. And then 28% are in the provisional range, as is the district right now, 63.9%, and we are provisionally accredited. And then 16% of our schools are below the 50% threshold, so that means those schools would actually be unaccredited. So then looking at American government here, we look at our MPI points, we see that we have 1 school that actually, we have a 4-year trend here, but we have 1 school that's actually already taken the government test, and that would be Lincoln College Prep, and their scores have already come in at 413.6, and what you see here is a 5-year high. And so with many of the things that we're working with our schools on, we do anticipate that our other schools will come in at a higher percentage than what they were last year. So then we have here our 17 MAP Proficient and Advanced. And what you see here is in the left column, or on the left side of each one of these columns, you see KCPS scores, and I know you see the key down there, but if you look at the blue and the gold at the top, those represent our percentage for Proficient and Advanced. And then if you look at the column to the right of that, then you see the Missouri, the state average. So we wanted to make sure that we lined up the KCPS average to our state average so that we could see here how we're doing as far as closing the achievement gap. And one of the things that we have set as one of our goals is that we want to lessen the achievement gap here between the state and Kansas City Public Schools. And we look at we had 7 elementary schools that actually had Proficient and Advanced percentages that were above 40%, and those are Cook, Pitcher, James, Whittier, FLA, Border Star, and Hartman. And we've set a goal of increasing our proficient and advanced percentages by 4.5%, or by closing, if we want to look at it like this, by closing the achievement gap by somewhere between 4 and 5%. One of the things that as we continue to move forward, we realize that the only way to lessen the achievement gap is to make sure that we're growing at a faster rate than the state. So if the state is gaining 1 percentage points, then we want to gain about 5 percentage points. And that's how at some point we'll close those gaps. So then we look at math. And based on our math scores, we made a lot of database decisions this year. We brought in a lot of professional development for our schools, so that one of the things that our Council of Great City Schools audit showed us was that mathematics was very rote in our curriculum, and it was very procedural. Unfortunately, when a kid takes the MAP test is not a procedural test. It is a problem-solving test. So kids must know how to problem solve and think critically. So when we look at our math scores here, I think we can clearly see there are some gaps here between Kansas City Public Schools and Missouri, and I think that is very representative of everything that we saw in that Council of Greater City Schools audit. When we look at 8th grade there, I do want to make note of the fact that 8th grade is low because many of our students who take advanced mathematics, who take algebra in 8th grade, are not in this number. Since algebra was not scored this year, then we were not able to go back and to place those scores in here, which would have actually helped our 8th grade scores. Then I do want to recognize the 5 elementary schools that actually had proficient and advanced percentages above 40%: Hale, Cook, Pitcher, James, Whittier, and Hartman. So looking at interventions, so we have system-wide interventions, and then we also have tiered interventions. And I'm going to talk about our system-wide interventions, and I do want Trinity Davis to come up and talk about some of her observations, and then also some of the qualitative and quantitative data that's already been collected on some of the efforts that we're making this school year around our system-wide interventions and also around our tiered interventions. When we look at system-wide, we have our monthly principals meetings that are focused solely on instruction and data. And what we do here is, and here you see a sample agenda, and what you see is a data dive, and you also see an opportunity for principals to rotate into sessions where they can learn from their peers who are successful. We are giving quarterly benchmark exams so that we can see where our kids are falling, and then we use those to determine where there are good practices and where there are things that we need to look at and try and see if we need to duplicate. And then we have our collaborative Wednesday PD sessions monthly, and what you see here is that a calendar, and our teachers actually gather by content area on one Wednesday out of every month, and that Wednesday, that is a collaborative session where we actually go over high-level questioning. We go over checking for understanding. We go over all of those things, and they get an opportunity to collaborate with other people who teach the same subject, the same grade as they do. And then we've recently completed our walkthrough tool, which was meant for Kansas City Public Schools. We collaborated with the New Teacher Project, or TNTP, to create this tool, and we had principals on the committee, we had teachers on the committee, we had our union president on the committee, and what we wanted was, we wanted teachers to look at 3 things, and we feel like these are 3 high leverage, high yield things. If we can get every teacher to understand those very well, then we can begin building. First, what is being taught, the focus, making sure that there's alignment. Based on our Council of Great City Schools audit, we know that there was not alignment here. We had a lot of textbook-based instruction that did not necessarily align to the Missouri standards. So in order for us to make sure that there was alignment, we wanted to put that in our walkthrough tool. Are we looking at a lesson that is actually aligned to the standards? Then how is it being taught? And that would be rigor. Is it being taught at a lower level, or is it being taught at the level that it will be tested? And we want to make sure that if it is not being taught at a level that's being tested, that teachers have the tools and they're being coached on how to scaffold and get the kids to where they need to be. The standard is high, and it is our role not to lower the standard, but to scaffold and bring kids up to where the standard is. And so then the last one, our students learn. That's the most important thing, because we can put all kinds of actors and actresses up to present material, but at the end of the day, we have to make sure that our students are actually learning what it is that they are supposed to learn. And so those are the three areas that our new walkthrough tool actually addresses, and I think our principals liked it, and they liked it to the point a couple of them asked me, are we going to do a similar tool for principals so that we can have more of a focus? And so those things are things that we'll be considering soon. And then our tiered interventions, and after I finish this, I am going to allow Trinity to come up. And tiered interventions, we have monthly PLCs that are actually conducted by our assistant superintendents, and those are for all the schools that are below 90 and the 90 attendance. And we know that there is a direct correlation between students coming to school and students being successful in school. And so that is the reason why we hold these monthly attendance PLCs. There's quarterly math PD for grades 3 through 6. Right now, what we do is we look at our curriculum and we identify those power standards. Those power standards are simply those standards that we know if a child can master those, the child can master that grade level. And so we've taken those power standards and we've given them to our presenters. And what they do is they provide strategies for our teachers so that kids can be engaged in something other than a worksheet or anything other than sit and get. They can be engaged in actual activities that align with what it is that our curriculum and our pacing guide has on it for that particular quarter. And then we have American Institute for Math and Science training, and that is for grades 7 through 9. So we actually have training for our algebra teachers, and they are getting very meaningful training. It's very engaging. They're getting up and they're walking and they're doing a lot of really fun activities, and those are translating right back into the classroom. Balanced reading PD for K through 2. We realize that if we don't fix K through 2, then we will continue to struggle as a system. And so one of our focus for this year and for next year will be K through 2, making sure that we get all kids reading by the time they get to third grade, so that third grade teachers are not trying to fill a lot of gaps, but that the kids we've already filled those gaps. We've already not allowed those kids to fall behind as K through 2 students. And one of the main things that we do is if we want to improve kids, we improve adults. So we want to make sure that we continue providing that balanced reading, and that will happen this semester. And there'll be all of our Tier 3 schools. Monthly focus and priority visits by our friends at DESE. They come out every month and they're walking buildings and they are seeing a lot of the items that we have been actually going over in principals meetings. It's very refreshing that there's an alignment in what it is that we're giving principals and what's actually being seen in schools. Intensive support from CNI. I think Dr. Davis will talk more about the support. We have several schools that we actually provide intensive support for based on having new teachers at a grade level, based on certain concerns, a new curriculum guide at a certain grade level, a number of items, a number of reasons why we may provide intensive support for a particular school. And then there's increased support from the assistant superintendents, and they are there to provide coaching and support for our principals to make sure that they're looking for the right things. Dr. Davis.
So, in just talking about some of the observations and the feedback and things we've seen in the classrooms, I have to start off by saying in 5 years, this is the best instruction I've been able to walk in and see across the board, when I go through K through 12 classrooms. For one, which Dr. Shepard talked about the audit we received, and one of the pieces of feedback was that our curriculum really needed to teach teachers what they were doing. So there are several links within the curriculum that actually will show them videos of what they should be doing or give them a little article to read, something to help them with their instruction. So one thing I can say at this point is we know that curriculum is being implemented. We still have work to do, and then we also know that our pre and post assessments are actually being done now. So teachers are actually able to look into that data. So looking at elementary, just starting off, we quantify and look at the touches that we have with each of our each coordinator with each teacher. So they will go into a classroom and they may help teachers plan, they may co-teach, they may model, they coach, they do all different types of services for teachers. And so at this point, we've had over 800 touches And as we update and look at it, I'm pretty sure by the end of February, we'll have over 1,000. So they're in there constantly working with teachers one-on-one, in addition to the Wednesday PD. So just looking at elementary to start from the beginning, our elementary curriculum we know is being taught, but there is a challenge before us, is that some of our teachers do still want that scripted curriculum, that scripted textbook that they can go through day by day. So I constantly remind them, I did this today with the teacher, that we got 0 points when we followed that scripted program. And that's because we were following the program and not looking at the data based on our student need. So that's something that we're stepping away from. So there is a challenge in getting the teachers to be able to implement that. But one thing that I was at Truce last week, and one thing I told Dr. Shepard, you could see the layout in the classroom looks much better. They have their classroom libraries. They're set up by genres. They have their leveled books at their guided reading tables. But some of the things that we see is we need to get deeper with the data to make sure that when we are the teachers are teaching, that it's very targeted. And so as we're moving toward a universal screener, making sure our teachers know that doesn't replace hearing a kid read out loud, and those things you can find out from that data. And so when Deb Diller comes, that'll be another piece that we'll have that'll help us to really be able, the teachers to really be able to see that piece. The phonics instruction, I have to say, we have over 83% of our teachers trained in phonics. And so I went into a classroom today. Funny thing, this was a teacher who said she was not coming to get the training, and she's been in the district for over 30 years, and I went in there, and she couldn't wait to let me see the students do the Valtown. And the students all knew how to do it. I recorded it because it was really good to see our students who are ELL being able to really master those sounds. So one of the things that I know, I really can't wait to see the impact of that in our K through 2 data. Mike will have to do a good analysis for us as we look at how they were scoring on the NWEA before and how they look at the universal screener for next year, really seeing how that the phonics instruction is impacting our kids' learning. One of the things about science, we are seeing more science instruction at the elementary level. So that is really nice to see. They're still learning the Discovery Ed platform, but we even have teachers who have started using the formative assessment part. So not just giving the pre and post, they're building formatives in there, and they're using the formatives that come in there. So we're starting to see that. That's really a big piece on the rise. Math instruction, as Dr. Shepard said, it was rote before, and so now we're seeing with the new curriculum piece and all of the supplemental pieces in there, we are seeing the math instruction move greatly, to another level where I can see that they're actually aligned to the standard. Now, with Marco Ramirez, he's here right now doing PD. He did PD today. One teacher's feedback was, he's been going over anchor charts with us a lot. And I said, yeah, he's going to keep doing it till he's finished at the end of this year, because that's an expectation. When a kid's doing math, they need something to look up, a visual, to see the steps of the algorithm or whatever they're performing. And so that's one thing he's hit hard with them, and you see it in the classroom. I went to Banneker, and you could see them all around the room. So kids were automatically looking up so they could finish doing their math work. Some of the things that we know that our elementary teachers still need in the curriculum, and that we're working with Larry Ainsworth. He's a curriculum person that's come in and done professional development with my department, as well as with the principals. He'll be back in March. We're gonna help us work on creating learning progression. So we know that our standards are asking a lot. So what are the skills that our kids need in order? So first they need to learn this before they go to this, and then they go to this, so that teachers can then look and see that they're teaching up to the standard. One of the things I talked to Dr. Shepard about is that maybe our pre-test should really hit the learning progressions, and our post-test hit the standards, so that our teachers could really be able to see that what skills they're actually missing. So that's one thing that we're working on that we know that'll help the teachers. We did not put ICANN statements where we break the standard down into kid-friendly terms, but we've had teachers really request that, so that's another area of work for us to do to make sure the teachers can look at those standards and break it down for the students to understand. At our secondary schools, we noticed that our new teachers are really grasping the curriculum. That's one thing. We bring them in quarterly, and so we're starting to see that they're taking on their in ELA. Chris was just saying, the coordinator, how they're really using the Newsela, which is something that gives up to date. Like, today, for example, there was a school shooting. There'll be a big article in that tomorrow for the kids to be able to read, and it'll be at different reading levels so that kids can that everyone gets the concept of the reading. It has writing components to it and everything, and so those are things we're seeing teachers use. Teachers and principals are submitting lesson plans to the secondary coordinators to help the teachers plan. And so that's been another big piece. So they're just having planning sessions where it may only be 5 teachers that come after school to do a planning session, but that really helps them. And then they're also submitting them to the coordinators, and they feel comfortable doing that. And that's a big feat for us because there's a trust factor there. We're still working with secondary a lot on aligning the instructional core. But I will say the principals have taken on the instructional piece as instructional leaders, and that's been very helpful for us because we know that as we go in, the principals are asking for that assistance from the coordinators. One of the things that we're doing differently that I thought was a good idea from the ELA coordinator for secondary is we're actually going to give the 9th graders the EOC this year, so that it guides us in where we're going for next year with the curriculum. What are some of their needs? And because 9th grade and 10th grade, the standards are so close together, it'll really help us to make sure we're fine-tuned for next year. And so, and then that'll help increase the writing in the classroom. The state assessment is going to demand more writing for our students, and so we're making sure that we increase that in the curriculum as well as in the daily instruction. We've had Ames come in that does math PD for our 7th, 8th grade and Algebra 1 teachers. And so we're actually seeing that in the classroom because it's giving them hands-on strategies that they could use with kids. And I will say, they're having fun in those PD sessions. I've been in there with them. It's fun. I mean, the hands-on experiences. So imagining those and those kind of strategies in the hands of kids, that's another area that I feel excited about. One thing that we do need to still work on is to get the worksheets out of the student hands. That's still an issue. And so we're still working, and that's why we're helping with the planning, because that's a way to get away from that. I know that it's easy to go pull something you've used out, out for 10 years, but that's one of the things that if we help them plan and we continue to put those resources in the curriculum, they'll start backing away from that. So I think the 2 areas that I feel the secondary needs goes back to the same thing that elementary needs, those learning progressions, because when they get into high school, middle school, and high school, the gap is bigger if we haven't filled it. So they need that so they'll know where to go with that standards. But I will conclude with one exciting piece of information is that we've had teachers that have started calling us in the last 2 weeks saying, can we start building our own common formatives? And that's something that we were looking at down the road for teachers to be able to do. They want to do it now. Meaning they give the pretest, they give the post-test, they want to look at the in-between piece, and they want to build it based upon their data from the pretest, and so that's huge. I mean, like I said, this has been a really good year of what I've seen in the last 5 years in the district, so it's a lot going on. We're busy, but it's worth it, so, yeah.
I have a couple of questions. The first one, first question is just to check for understanding. When we were talking about algebra was not scored this year, just repeat for me why that was. I'm sorry, you probably said it, but I didn't catch it.
This is something that the state of Missouri isn't necessarily proud of. Their contractor, Questar, they're charged with making a new form of the EOC, the end of course assessments, every single year, and they call it a form effect. So they said that the new Algebra 1 and the new English 10 tests were quantifiably more difficult than the tests from the previous years, which leads them to be not comparable for accountability purposes. We have gone over this, this has been a big deal in the news. Personally, our Algebra 1 scores remained flat from the previous year, which means that in comparison, we actually did very well in Algebra 1 this year. But for accountability purposes, they were removed from all calculations, which is why our high schools do not have APRs populated, because our high schools, their only scores in math and in English are those English 10 and Algebra 1 scores.
Okay, that was what I understood. So I think I just want to be careful as we talk about this in the community that we make sure that we clearly state that the state is not counting for the Algebra 1, and you said English Language Arts.
English 10.
English 10, because it's not that we are not using those scores, and it wasn't a scoring failure on our end, it was actually a state contract.
I will say, Ms. Manser, that we have been very open about our scores We are not hiding our scores in English 2 or Algebra 1. It is a state dictate that they be pulled from accountability.
And I'm sorry, now my real question, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. There's a considerable amount of investment being made in professional development. You've talked about so many levels and tiers of PD. It's sort of astounding. Have we built in, I know you see you're monitoring for results through the assessment data that you are receiving. Do we have any other evaluative measures or mechanisms that will allow us to determine other aspects of the return on that large investment? It's a substantial investment, and I know when you make that kind of large, not just financial, but a human investment, you're putting a lot of human time into this PD, because you've got indications that that's what's going to strengthen performance and knowledge, capacity, competency, data understanding. How do you assess for teachers' ability to really effectively utilize that and to really absorb and institutionalize it so it's not a sort of one and done, that it becomes part of the fabric of how they teach, not just in this year, but how they teach in future years?
Yes, so there are two answers to that question. The first thing is we created our walkthrough tool. And what we know about professional development is practices generally change before you begin to see scores change. And teachers have to change their practices and begin looking at teaching things in a more rigorous manner, making sure that there's alignment, there's rigor, and that students are learning. So that's the reason why we actually created our walkthrough tool. That tool will help us determine what level we have our teachers. It's a rubric. There are 4 different categories in the rubric. And what happens is when a principal goes in to look at a teacher, this is a non-evaluative tool. It is a growth tool. So what we're doing is we're going in, not just our principals, but all of our curriculum and our central office staff. We're going in and we're looking to see if these things are in place. And if they're not, or if they're not done at the level that we would like them to be done, then we actually have feedback to give the teacher. And there's a rubric there where a teacher can see, okay, I'm a 1 and I'm lagging in this skill right now. But if I look at the action items that I need to do in order to get to a 2, then there are some changes that I can make. Our principals were also given a feedback protocol, and that's a 7-minute feedback protocol to make sure that, because observation alone does nothing. What helps teachers is the feedback that we're able to give them once we finish the observation. So those 2 things would be, number 1, practices change before you begin to see results. And number 2, we have to coach people on their practices, and we have a walkthrough tool in order to get that done. And so this walkthrough tool will actually give us data, and it should give every principal data. If I'm going in all of my 3rd grade teachers' classrooms and they're developing in, let's say, rigor, then now I have data to drive my own PD. So now when I give my PD on a Wednesday, I can say, okay, based on my snapshot here, I see that, our school needs help in the area of rigor. So I can, pull things together. I can teach my teachers, because part of our responsibility is to teach teachers how to teach. And so that is what this tool is supposed to do. It is a non-evaluative growth tool that helps everyone shift to the right around to a 3 or a 4.
Board Member Hartsfield?
I wouldn't. '15, '16, and then '17.
where it was. Then this was done, you would remember this one, because this, we see that those ones who came on in 2013, but I think Carl Evans, you were there, it was this none of that, correct? Oh.
I think one of the things that we have to be consistent in our care and our scaffolding is for those buildings that we destabilize, either through moving them or making a radical change in their curriculum. Because what I'm seeing is that they never, this is short-term right now. We're only seeing very short-term with Wendell Phillips. But African Centered has never scored back to where it was scoring prior to all of this. So I think one of the things that we have to be very intentional about is that it's good when we see schools do well and sustain themselves, but when we have had a hand in destabilizing, we have to show those extra efforts that we're putting in to get them back to where we know that they were performing before.
And if I can just speak to that, you know, I think as an administration, we did have this conversation about what happened at that school. In fact, we talked about this during our dry run. And I think it's, we have to look at what's also happened internally with the merger, because we pose the same question for Hartman. Hartman had a merger too, and they went up. And so then we have to begin to look at some of the internal variables around how did the staff react to kids who came in? How did the principal react? We know that there was some major disagreement about who would be principal. So there was already a scenario where you didn't have everybody on board already. So you had a situation over there where I think the dynamics of a principal coming in and then certain teachers wanting another principal, some of those things played a role. Whereas at Hartman, they took kids from Page, but there's stability over there. There's a seasoned principal, a seasoned staff, and they embrace those kids in a way that maybe that didn't happen at Phillips. But I think it's a really good point that in the future, anytime we make these kind of decisions, we have to look at all of those dynamics, because the kids become the losers in situations where we don't have everybody on board and ready to receive those kids with open arms.
And just a comment to that, because I think this would be a good case study for us to look at, because Phillips and Hartman's principals work very closely together. You might want to find out and look at what were the variables that allowed one to succeed and another not to, because they both did have seasoned principals, so there's some other dynamics, and there is a major dynamic when you talk about importing people and then exporting people from a building. That's a major difference too. So I think we need to look at this. This would be a good case study for us to look at.
Absolutely. Will do, Dr. Hursfield.
Board Member Oates?
Mr. Reynolds, earlier you talked about the Algebra 1 and the English scores that were thrown out due to an error by the state's exam proctor, I guess, for contract for a better. I felt like I read that there were discussions around that contract that the state was getting into. And I know I've heard here before about how it was very important for us if we can get that data back sooner. I think it takes about 12 weeks for us to get an exam. It doesn't even take like the LSAT that long. And so what I was interested in is, are we communicating that with the state? Because I know I've heard it here before that would be very valuable for us to get data much sooner than November, December.
Mr. Oates, yes, we are communicating that at every available opportunity to anybody at the state that I'm in front of. I'm sure that Dr. Bedell and Dr. Shepard.
I've done it on the advisory council as a representative to the commissioner, even though we don't have one now.
I will articulate also that a lot of times the state promises and then fails to deliver in a timely fashion. So a lot of times we're expecting results back, and then we're playing the waiting game. and we continue to wait, and sometimes we've waited months. So we completely understand your statement, and we voice the same opinion, and we do bring this up to any members of the state, their accountability people, their senior leadership at the TAC. This is brought up.
And is this something, I guess, and this may be a question for you, Dr. Bedell, that our peer districts and other districts feel strongly, very, very strongly about?
Yes, and one of the things that I'd look to bring at our next superintendent's meeting here with Gaydon is that we put together a petition around making some demands on getting data in at a much earlier rate. What I have seen is that probably 40 superintendents or so on the east side of Missouri have already come together to voice their concerns around some of the things that I think we've done. We just have not made it a formal demand, and that's something that we can definitely demand of whoever comes in as the next commissioner, that we have to be able to get this data back in a timely manner. Many superintendents will tell you there's a Google Alerts that I get every day. It's a superintendent Google Alerts. And I read it in the superintendent's Google Alert that goes around the country, that people in this state feel that because we get the data so late that it's meaningless. There's not much that we can do with it. And generally what you want to have happen is that you've gotten your data in enough time that you can plan over the summer, you can implement come August, and by November, you should be making a decision on whether you need to pivot or make some adjustments so that you can make sure that you're making the right changes for the remainder of the school year to get these kids ready. But if you don't get the data until November or December, I mean, you've already missed a huge window, and you're just basically going off of trend data. And with a highly mobile school district like ours, that hurts us. I mean, with 40% of the kids in and out, that really does hurt us, and it puts us behind the 8 ball. So it actually hurts urban school districts like ours at a much higher rate than it does with some of the other school districts that are more static.
Mr. Evans? Whoopsie was next. I apologize. Go ahead, Board Member Whoop.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. One, we talked, Dr. Hartsfield talked a little bit about, I call it stability. I know we focus a lot on mobility within Kansas City Public Schools, and I think that's an important thing to focus on. But what I'm starting to realize is there is the other part of that, which is stability in many forms. It is in the form of leadership in a building, constant teacher in a classroom, a student stable life. So when we do look at what happened maybe between Hartman and Phillips, I think there are some additional learnings we can find in this stability denominator. So that's just one thing. I wanted to focus my comments on, I know you'd kind of mentioned our friends DESE and the tiered interventions, which yes, they do visit our focus and priority schools. But I always think of RSIT, which for those that don't know what it is, it's the Regional School Improvement, I think it's team. So I don't know if this is correct to think of it this way, but I think of that as a system-wide intervention, but at a much different level. So you're working within our buildings, but I've been a part of the RSIP process as an observer first on the parent side, and now I get to sit at the big kids table as a board member. And I find it extremely helpful to me when, because what happens at that meeting, as far as interventions, as far as I can tell, is that when we became unaccredited and we began that process, it was a process that would allow the state to kind of have for lack of a better term, come up with the open kimono type of meeting with them, where we're sharing some of our struggles, some of our challenges, so that they can help us in our practice, in our both on the curriculum and instruction side and the PD side, and anything that we choose to share with them. And through that process, No, 3 superintendents I've seen go through that process, Dr. Green, Al, and now Dr. Bedell. I feel in some way that process has helped this particular district get stronger on both the system-wide and even I think the tiered interventions, because those folks go into our schools. So we may say we're doing something, but they're going in and checking to see, is what we're saying we're doing, are we doing it? And are they seeing that it's having the effect that they would hope? So I don't know that you see that process as being, one of your interventions, but for me, I feel it's had a lot of value. It is an open meeting, so anybody that wants to attend can. You don't have to have any sort of special invitation. It's always on the school district calendar. But I feel as a board member, it's a very good use of my time to go to that meeting and hear the dialogue that takes place. And I would tell you, I think the reason it's actually gotten better, Dr. Bedell, over the last who have come on, movement is difficult if you don't have a trusting relationship. And you need a trusting relationship so you can share and be open about what some of our struggles and challenges are. But that's how we get better. That's how the district gets stronger. And so I would hope that you would see that as one of the interventions.
Board Member Evans.
Dr. Bedell, your staff, I have to give them credit, come up with a lot of creative and innovative ways of teaching. You have staff development, you have teacher training, and I guess my question is, how do you manufacture that into results? And it seems to be extremely difficult, very, very difficult, because we have a change in the testing process, look like every cycle. And how do you adjust to creating something for teachers when you don't have stability at the state level? And when I think about what takes place, it almost seems like it's an exercise in futility, because when you change that test every minute, you come up with a new set of rules that you have to apply. And where does it stop? Where does it end? And I also think, has testing changed the scope of teaching? It seems like you guys have a very, very difficult task.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is very challenging. However, what we do is we focus on standards. When we have not seen a test, and when the state tells us that we're changing the test and we've changed the standards, then what we do is we look at the standards, and it's called we unwrap the standards. We look at, what is the verb asking us to do? Is it asking us to analyze? Is it asking us to identify? What is the verb asking us to do? And then what is it that the kid needs to know? And so when we focus on unpacking the standard like that, then what happens is teachers, then our professional development teaches teachers how to teach so that kids can now do what that standard is asking them to do. And so while it is difficult, but we do have guidance, and then the state also, fortunately, they release item specifications. So what those item specifications tell us is, for every standard, at what level it will be tested. Will it be tested at a lower level? Will it be tested at a higher level? Will there be, what level of thinking is required from the student? Is it going to be at a low level where they just have to identify, or will they have to compose? And so that, we take those item specifications, and those actually drive what it is that we give to our teachers. So we know that if a standard is going to be tested, let's say at a lower level, but that doesn't mean we just teach low, but that means that we make sure that the kid is able to master it at the level that the state is asking. If they're supposed to do it at a higher level, let's say compose or analyze, construct, or defend. If they're having to do it at that level, then we teach our teachers what type of instruction needs to happen in order for the end result to be that child being able to analyze, criticize, or whatever it is. So I would say that teaching is different. When I first started, I know that I did not have, the first couple of years, we did not have high-stakes testing, but I will say that over the years, high-stakes testing has been a part of what we do, and so we've learned how to make sure that we teach the standard. And if we focus on the standard and the level that standard is asking the kid to master, then we feel like if we keep 2 eyes on the field and 1 eye on the scoreboard, then we'll get there. And we focus on practices.
And Mr. Evans, I know we talked about this morning too, about just being realistic. Anytime I've been a part of various generations of assessments, when you move from one to another, the entire state takes a dip. The entire state takes a dip. And then those iterations tend to be in existence from anywhere from 7 to 10 years. In some states, it's every 5 years. They change. And so we actually know that that is a part of what we're trying to do. We know that the latest iteration of MSIP 5 started in 2009. When did it start?
I'm thinking 2014.
2014, and we're already in the process of getting ready to move to MSIP 6. So this is part of what we have to also be able to game plan for and be prepared to deal with, is that every 6, because they wanted to make this change effective originally for the 1920 years, my thought. And now they're pushing it back because they aren't ready. So it's almost a 5-year cycle here.
Board Member Lewis.
Thank you. First of all, Dr. Shepard and Dr. Davis, I rejoice every time I hear you all refer to being in the building and being in these classrooms, because that's such a critical piece. When I look at the monitoring report as it's presented, and sometimes when we talk about this takes time and we're turning a ship around, and I complain that it feels like we're starting from scratch, and sad to say now because of the quality of people we have on board, we are starting from scratch. But also when I look at that same chart that's up there now, and I look at some schools that go from a 42 to a 78% in 2 years, it'd be nice to have another column like we have in our budget reports to explain the variance. Because it does me no good to see a blind variance, and I don't know, well, what happened there. Because as soon as I know what happened there, I'm going to say, why aren't we doing it somewhere else? So that maybe it is something that can move it in a year or 2 years drastically. Now, maybe it's not sustainable. I don't know. So that's one piece. The other piece is it's hard for me to tell based on the monitoring report. One of the big things that the policy says is that those students below basic and below basic should see significant gain in a school year. I can't tell what the indicators of whether or not, number one, how many of those students it is, and number two, are they seeing, on track to see significant gain? And the last comment I will make is that and we're all fully aware that it takes a lot more than PD and curriculum. There's a lot of barriers to learning for students outside of if we get the perfect curriculum alignment, we get the perfect PD, that our children still show up sometimes, so I see that as part of academic intervention, taking care of those things. So I know we have RTI in place. I don't have a feel for whether or not it's in place in 100% of the schools at 100% of the level that it needs to be. Just some thoughts as we continue to talk about the equity piece.
Okay, and one of the things that I do want to assure you is that we are looking at levels for kids. We actually had a professional development where in every principal's meeting is some type of data dig, and what we did was we did look at the levels for the kids, and we looked at the bands, and we looked at what kind of things needed to happen in order for this kid to move from below basic to basic, and basic to maybe a higher level in basic, or to proficient. And that's part of the RTI process. That is part of what it is that now I will say that we're not doing it with fidelity, but we are moving in that direction, making sure that all of our problem-solving teams in every building are alive and working, and making sure that we have those conversations. When a kid has been below basic for a couple of years, what is it that are, when they've scored below basic, what do we do? I mean, what are our intensive interventions that we're providing for that kid? What is happening here when we look at our trend data? So I do want to assure you that we are looking at individual students, and we are teaching principals how to look at those individual students and have the right conversations around what needs to happen. Sometimes there is wraparound services. We know that, some kids just come to school and they're not ready to learn. We've got to figure out what we can do to wrap around them so that they can get in a mode where they can learn. And then some students, are not challenged, and we've got to figure out, okay, how do we deal with the kid that doesn't feel challenged? He or she can do the work, but they don't want to do it because this is not a challenge for them. So we're looking at all of those scenarios, and we are working through that. It is a process, and it is a work in progress, but I will tell you that we are, as we meet with principals and as we go into their buildings, we are looking at what is going on here, because our goal, we gave the goal. Now, we know that it may not happen at 100% this year, but we did talk to our principals. We said, if we move everyone up one level, what would that look like? And now if we work towards that and make sure that, within the next couple of years, we can see kids getting to Proficient. We can see kids becoming advanced, and we can see kids being college and career ready. And so we are addressing that. And we're working with our principals. And then we also are building a plan next year to address those items for intervention.
I had two questions, and I do really appreciate the process of continuous improvement. I'm going to start out by saying that. But really around, one, the surety that our interventions are going to be effective. I think it's hard to hear things like, I think that this is a good idea, and I know that when we were brought some of the scripts, Ms. Davis, and this was prior to this administration, and we were told that, this was an important strategy so that teachers could say the words that were on the test, but now hearing that there was zero gain based off of that because they weren't using the data to inform their teaching. I just want to lift up that there's a certain expectation that we have some surety around the strategies that they're going to get us the game because we have so much at stake. So I'm wondering about our process of how we implement our lessons learned, because we know obviously with education or any other industry there's going to be lessons learned, but really understanding how we implement those processes. And then finally around our own organizational development, knowing when you have to go about face and when there needs to be smooth transitions. I'm very curious about that and how we're bringing people along, and specifically around our walkthroughs. We've had, tools to do walkthroughs, and this seems like it's an improved tool in alignment with your continuous improvement process. But I'm wondering when that tool was started to be implemented, and then how did we get teachers, prepared for that tool to be used, and how that was implemented as well. So.
Okay, so to answer your first question about lessons learned, there has to be alignment between curriculum instruction, assessment, and intervention. And what we know based on our Council of Great City Schools audit was that we did not have alignment in this system. Much of our data was based on what happened with NWEA, and a lot of the decisions that were made were based on how students performed on NWEA. But then when we look at the alignment piece, all of those things that are tested on NWEA versus what happens for the state of Missouri and what the state of Missouri is asking kids to be able to do, they're not aligned. And so when you have a system that you can work as hard as you want to, but if you don't have alignment, and I always compare it to, like, if I am a football player and you take me outside and we throw a baseball and you want me to be ready for Sunday's game, there's no way that I'm going to be ready for Sunday's game because I've got to practice how I play. And so, what we have to do is we have to make sure that the curriculum instruction, the interventions, and the assessments are all aligned, which is what we're doing this year. Now, that does not mean that it is without fault. we are still very much so learning. But one thing that we know that research has shown is that when those four things are aligned, then systems can move forward, and they can move forward at a more rapid pace. So part of when we look at our assessments that we're giving our students every quarter, well, those are aligned to a standard. When we look at now we have a curriculum. What we had before was a textbook base where you went from chapter to chapter, and there was no alignment and really not a lot of conversation around.
Well, and my question is not about the what, because there's high confidence in the what, like your ability to align. And my question is more about how do we bring the organization to a place where we're all rowing in the same direction, and there's some transition for effectiveness.
Well, we start with principles. We always start with principles. We make sure that principals understand what the look-fors are. And then everything is also presented, we talk about everything in our cabinet meeting. So everybody in cabinet is aware of what's going on. And then we talk about like some of the challenges that we may have. And then we move it down to principles. And principles are when we think about our instructional core, you got 3 ways that we improve our instructional core. And the principal is the only person that can actually affect all 3 areas of the instructional core. And that's the reason why we focus on principles. If teachers haven't gotten it, it's because they haven't gotten it yet. This walkthrough tool doesn't actually go live until 18-19. What we're doing this year is we're actually calibrating. We're making sure that when we walk into classrooms, we all see the same thing. We're making sure that when we walk into any situation that we're asking the right questions, and that, if you see that teacher is lagging, then I shouldn't see that teacher as advanced. So those are the things that we're working on right now with our principals. And so then as we continue working on that, then we're going to train our teachers, and then our teachers by next school year will understand how it is, what we're looking for, and how they will be. And this is not an appraisal tool again. This is a growth tool, and they will be receiving feedback on this tool.
Let me chime in because I also like to help provide an answer just from the macro level. Because there's a micro component to what we're doing, and I think a lot of what Dr. Shepard is talking about is at the micro level, really moving from a jigsaw puzzle method to it all coming together to address the whole system. And so from my view of it all is we have to be very intentional in what we're doing. We want to make sure that whatever we say we're doing, that there's evidence. That's the reason why we have encouraged board members to show up to some of our meetings, so you can see that what we're up here doing is not lip service. We've also encouraged board members to continue to do school visits, and if it means that some board members want to go with some of us to go conduct some walkthroughs so we can all see that that practice is taking place, that will give board members more of an assurance that the organization is starting to move in the right direction. We know that when you think about where we are right now as a school district, this, in essence, is putting a lot of stress on this system. And I think there's a little fear factor that when you are trying to make the kind of change that we're making, that the stress can, in essence, slow us down a little bit because we want to go fast. But we want to go slow in order to go fast. And that's a piece of the work that Mike Fullen talks about, in that we are doing this in a very intentional and professional way. And so part of it is then beginning to see the transitions take place with what we're going to be doing this summer with our Summer Institute. Getting everybody to understand how this connects to the strategic plan and how it connects to Board Policy Ends 1.0. I'm looking at it from the whole macro level of how this all has to come together. And I can tell you from when we started August, I can sit here and tell you my confidence on where we would be within the next 3 to 4 years was a little shaky. Do I think, I told you all that I thought it would be 4 years before we hit being fully accredited. I think based on what we're doing right now and what I'm getting back when I go to school visits and hearing from teachers, that this may be faster than those 4 years. This may be sooner. And so, but it is a process, everybody. I don't think we're that far away. There's a lot that we have to do, but I think that people are buying into it. And the only thing that I can tell you, Tony Stansberry shared with Dr. Shepard and I last Friday. And he just said, I'm not trying to blow anything, any smoke or anything. I want you all to know these have been what I'm seeing play out in the schools based on what's being presented in our sit. We have not seen this kind of alignment and connection playing out. That tells me that that alignment is starting to come together when you have the state reporting out that they're seeing it play out in the classroom.
Thank you. Very encouraging to hear. Board Member Manser?
Yes, I mean, it is great, and I feel very encouraged by the thoroughness and your understanding of how you scaffold and how you build that foundation. So I think, I really liked what my colleague Natalie Lewis said about, because I think it was something that I'm thinking about, and I don't need an answer tonight, but that aspect of the variation. I noticed in the one slide, sorry, I'm not good with this mic. 9 schools had a drop in their APR for school year 16 to 17. And I don't need an answer right now, but I tried to look through what was that variation, and I didn't know if there were what elements and how if you have identified, you don't have to tell me what those are this evening, but if you've identified common themes, is there something or commonalities within that set of schools? From what I look on this one chart, some have just seems a slight variation. Some are more dramatic, and so I didn't know if you look both at what's happening instructionally, but if there are other, I don't know how you examine other areas, such as, are these schools with populations that are more highly mobile than other schools? Did you see any kind of shift in programming, sort of to Dr. Hartsfield's comments? Were there other conditions that might have occurred that would have contributed to that precipitous change? So those are just things on my mind.
Yes. And we can make sure that we provide those things because we did have that conversation prior to the board meeting. And so we can provide you with all of that. We can add an additional column. I think Board Member Lewis did talk about adding an additional column with just some explanations around what happened here. Where did they lose the points? Did they lose them in science? Did they lose them in math? Did they lose them in ELA? So we will do that. We'll provide that for you.
Yeah, and I'll just interject that the administration is doing working very hard to be proactive in forecasting what we want and what we need. And there is a point where the bow will break in terms of, we need more, we need more, we need more. And so while, I don't want to discourage anyone, we're all duly elected to ask for whatever we want. But we just being thoughtful about, how we incorporate our wishes in a way where we're not continuously just adding on one more thing. So, Mr. Oates.
Okay, really quickly, so, Madam Chair, I think one good place maybe to have that kind of conversation where you're doing that deep dive. I know, again, that in the strategic plan presentation, the facilitator of that did make a recommendation that the board and admin do like 1 or 2 deep dives a year. And isn't that what's going on Wednesday? Maybe not necessarily.
So we want to update you on some of the things that are coming on Wednesday, and then, but all of it is data based.
Yeah.
So we can talk about data. We can have a deep dive at the same time, and we can bring. So I think we can have a conversation about what exactly that meeting will be about. It's a training.
Yeah, maybe just a meeting. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be this next one, but sometime in the future we can plan it out. That way we can take care of that aspect. You mentioned the NWEA thing, and I'm glad you did because that reminded me. At some point, can we get an update on our progress towards finding the replacement?
Absolutely. I can give that to you tonight.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we actually had 8 bids, and we actually had our committee come together on, I think 2 Fridays ago, and reviewed the bids. And so we have the top 3 bids, and those companies are coming next Friday to present. So each of them will present for 1 hour and a half, and we've given them criteria around their presentation, what we want to hear, and based on the RFP. And so all 3 of them will be here on the 23rd. I think that Friday the 23rd.
But
Yes.
we're still trending towards like a March selection of a bidder, or would it be
Well, we
later?
will have one that day.
Oh.
What will happen is, the committee will hear that day. They'll each will present for 1 hour and a half, and then there'll be a vote. You have actually a comment card where you actually can comment on all the different criteria, and then you rate them, and then we take all of those ratings and we kind of put them together, and we come up with an average, and then that company that has the highest average actually wins the bid. And so from that point, it becomes about negotiation.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Board Member Lewis? All right. All right, is there anything else, Dr. Bedell?
Yeah, just a couple of comments to kind of close up this this portion of our presentation. To your point, we talked about a scorecard and making sure that we're monitoring our strategic plan. We are on top of that. I need somebody to challenge us on, are you implementing your strategic plan so we can bring them into a conference room and show them how everything that we said we were going to do this year, how it's being adhered to, and that we are indeed on top of the strategic plan. So we are more than prepared at any point to stop and provide an update to give you some assurances that we're serious about adhering to the scorecard and making sure that we're moving this district in the right direction. The other comment that I wanted to make, and for some reason I'm struggling here, Face ID. It's new. Okay, but I did want to just something I typed here, wrote down just about the work that we're doing right now. And I know I can be viewed as being a reasonably patient individual. But that's kind of that was built into me as an educator, and just the high stake component of being a teacher, teaching in the high stake arena, being a principal who was basically told that if you don't move the needle, you may not have a job, and not even being given time to do the job. But what we talk about is that there is urgency, and we want everybody to understand that there's urgency, but then there's recklessness. And I've seen a lot of people try to come in and be urgent to the point that they're reckless. And when you are reckless, then there is no way that you're going to ever get the alignment that you need to move a school system forward. So we are moving urgently, but we're doing it with intentionality. And that's something that I've talked about in the community when we put up that slide about being considerate, being intentional. We are being intentional in how we're trying to move this school district forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bedell, and we appreciate the extra layer of assurance there. If there's no other business to come before the board, the meeting is adjourned.
Do we have
Oh,
business?
is there a, wait a minute. That was it. All right, the meeting is adjourned. If there is a one business, okay, there is.
I don't know why it's not on the slide. I don't understand what happened there. Is it on the slide?
It might be.
There it is. Okay. So, sorry, I don't know what happened here. But we are asking the board to take action on these items, the KCPS Budget Amendment 1, and then to take action on the purchase of student activity buses.
All right, thank you. If there's no other business to come before the body, the meeting is adjourned. Have a great evening. Happy Valentine's Day.